Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to another installment of our New Mexico Recovers series. Today, we're covering a workshop on project management entitled "Herding Cats Grants Are a Contact Sport." My name is Robert Blanquera Nelson. I use he/him pronouns, and I'm the program manager for Pivotal New Mexico. And I'll be serving as your guide today. As you are logging into the Zoom room, make sure to introduce yourself, your name, your pronouns, your organization in the chat, and also just let us know like what you're hoping to get from this presentation today. And we'll go ahead and get started here in just a moment. So thank you again for joining us. Also, just want to give a shout out to the folks over at the Kellogg Foundation for being one of our primary sponsors for the New Mexico Recovers Workshop. And I'll get into some of the future ones here soon too. So we're just going to walk through a little bit about who we are. Let's really get this working. So yes, so today's agenda, we're going to do like a little welcome and check-in, a poll, and then we'll dive into what project management is, and we'll get into questions, and we'll get to closing. So Pivotal New Mexico is a nonprofit 501c3. We were founded in 2015. I was hired on as their first staffer in the summer of 2016, and we've grown quite a bit over the last couple years. And so, as you can see, some of our programming includes now Grow New Mexico, which helps us provide services all across the state, but also a lot more special projects coming our way too. And this is one of them. We want to make sure that people are accessing the recovery as best as possible. And we know just from our lessons after the recession in 2008 and 2009, like what do people really need to get through this really difficult time to serve our communities better. This is the Pivotal team. As you can see, mine's like smack dab there in the middle, but we've also grown quite a bit in terms of our team members too. So if you ever get a chance to say hello to one of our Pivotal folks, make sure that you do. They do some really awesome work across our state and every single day. So I mentioned the welcome and the check-in part. So if you're just joining us in the Zoom call, please make sure that you are introducing yourself in the chat, your name, your pronouns, your organization, what you're hoping to get from today. Especially, I see some familiar faces in the Zoom room, so I'm really glad to see a lot of familiar faces, and hopefully y'all will enjoy this workshop today. So upcoming, some things that are happening, as you know, like I'm the co-host of Impact and Coffee, which is a nonprofit networking group. The next one is Tuesday, the 14th at 9 a.m. over Zoom. Check out our Facebook page for more information on that. And our upcoming recovery series next week on the 15th at 2 p.m. Should we apply for this grant, which is a very important topic, hosted by our friend Tanya Brown over at the Grant Plan. And Tanya will be back in middle of January on the 19th of January, 2 p.m. For grant prospecting. So stay tuned for that one. That's going to be a really great workshop. We're gonna go ahead and skip the poll because I see some of our questions answered in the chat itself. We're gonna go ahead and show this video really quick so that folks get an understanding of like what herding cats is. Just a little humor today. So,
Father, he's the first cat herder in our family.
Herding cats. Don't let anybody tell you it's easy.
Anybody can herd cattle. Holding together 10,000 half-wild short hairs, well, that's another thing altogether.
Being a cat herder is probably about the toughest thing I think I've ever done.
I got this one this morning, right here, and if you look at his face, it's just ripped to shreds, you know?
You see the movies, you hear the stories, I'm living a dream. Not everyone can do what we do.
I wouldn't do nothing else.
It ain't an easy job, but when you bring a herd into town and you ain't lost a one of them, ain't a feeling like it in the world.
all right. Now that we've seen that, let's go herd cats. So what is project management? I know a lot of folks probably have a variety of different definitions of what project management is. I know on my heart, project management is about relationship management. It's about collaboration and relationships. And so the more and more the more and more people work in concordance together, the more a project can come to life and actually become finished. But this I just found off Google. So project management is defined as a collection of proven techniques for proposing, planning, implementing, managing, and evaluating projects combined with the art of managing people. It is the application of knowledge, skills, tools, and techniques to a broad range of activities to meet the specified requirements of a particular project. All just a bunch of, and if you look all across definitions, these are the very similar definitions to this one across the field. So, but more than anything, really what defines defines successful project management in a lot of ways is the foundation of it. And so what I really like people to walk through especially is setting up the foundation for you to have a successful project. And so understanding what your setup is, what you will do within, as a leader or as part of a team versus what you outsource outside of your organization or outside of your team, so to speak. And then most importantly, like, what is your time frame? And a lot of folks, they time frame is such a very strange thing. So like understanding like what you can do in a certain amount of time. And then, I always, by the adage, like, under promise and over deliver. So like, that's something that always kind of keep in mind fundamentally as you're working on a project specifically. So when we talk about setup, I know for myself, setting up all the key kind of ingredients, like a good recipe in a cookbook, requires you to understand like what are all the pieces that are going into this project? What are the outcomes? Who are the people that you need to be in touch with? What are some of the inputs? What are some of the inputs to putting in for a successful project? Like, what are the outside factors that need to come into there? What parts of the community need to be part of it, especially for a grant? Are there any community meetings that need to be held or input meetings that need to be held for this? So very, very important to kind of understand, like, what are your inputs? What is your setup, so to speak? So I always start with a checklist and I work backwards from there. So for me, it's about setting up like a Google Doc, whether it's a spreadsheet or setting up a table on a Word document or anything like that, and just setting up what exactly are those pieces going to be, whether it's what roles are going to happen, what roles are needed for this, what kind of financial stuff do you need, especially for writing a grant. And we call grants projects over here at Pivotal, along like with our sister organization, the Grant Plans. So and oftentimes you can find, especially in federal funding, you can find like you can find checklists within your notice of funding or your RFP that usually will help augment your own personal, like your own organization or project checklist, because there are some pieces that you might not have that are added to that are not necessarily part of the federal grant process. So when it comes to timeline and working backwards, I always like to set internal deadlines. So if you have something that's a deadline within your RFP, I always like to set those, ideally either a few days before, that something is due, or at least very ideally like a week ahead. So if you're thinking about, a deadline for your application, make sure that you build in time before the actual deadline to actually collect all your information, all the attachments, all the documents you're going to need, all the signatures you're going to need, and make sure that you do that at least 3 days in advance, and at most like a week in advance, so that you have a lot of time to play with stuff. And if you're in a review process within a team of people, you'll also know like what exactly, like, is there any revisions needed? Are there big rewrites that are needed or anything like that? Are you clear on your narratives? Are you clear on your budget narratives? All those good things. Are you clear on your logic models? So just making sure that all those pieces are as competitive as possible, because we know once we hit submit, it's done, and it's out of our hands completely. So, and then, when it comes to like outsourcing, like identifying like what you're going to do and what other people are going to do, this is important project management too. It's if you don't have a team of people, there's a chance that you might be doing this like solo as an executive director, or just one person within an organization. But that's not always very true. So even if you're an executive director, you have a board that you have in terms of supporting your work. So oftentimes I've seen one person shops rely on their board treasurer for financials. That person is probably a CPA of some sort. I also know that a lot of boards rely on internally within their own capacity, like helping out with program data or evaluation pieces, or just whatever people are willing to take on in terms of their own capacity. So make sure that you're utilizing the people that are close to you, even if you're a solo person like that. There's a lot of folks that are willing to help out in terms of that, and oftentimes with the kindness of their own hearts. So, but I know a lot of folks on the call, like I know a lot of the organizations on the call probably have like a by committee kind of feeling within their organization. So making sure that you're talking to your program managers and your program directors, that you're matching up with the outcomes they're seeing on the ground with the people you're trying to serve, and then that's being communicated directly within your project, so to speak, or within your grants. So. And I always tell people, like, start a meeting. Like that's the most important part of all of this. Once you start to see and read through like what the NOFA and what your RFP is going through, get a meeting together, pick through the pieces where people can actually pick through and say like, hey, that's your responsibility. You can actually take that. What's a deadline that can work for you? And then make sure that you're putting that into your big checklist, and also share that checklist. Like that's the beauty of Google. People can actually see what's going on a shared document, and they can add to it, they can edit, they can revise, they can ask questions, they can make comments. It's a beautiful way for people to get project management done together rather than having for you to do it all by yourself. So always like collaboration is a key portion to, like I said before, to project management itself. So, and it's all like, that's where we get the whole herding cats bit in terms of, yes, it is a contact sport. You're going to have to talk to somebody within your organization or within the community too. So even if you're solo and like working on a new program, always be working on, communicating with constituents. Like what are the effects and the impact that they're seeing on the ground, and how does that communicate within the narrative that you're trying to put into your grant project, so to speak. So I know I mentioned calling a meeting in the beginning at the outset, and also just setting regular meetings too. Maybe once a week, or if you're on a tighter timeline, just making sure you're, if it's doing a week, once a day, or at least making sure that people are reviewing like what are your action items that are needing to be done by a certain amount, by a certain time, or anything like that. I know I've gone through some tips, but the biggest tip I can give y'all is to make sure that you're double checking on your downloads and conversions of files, though, because I think, when you're doing the submission, you want to make sure. And a friend of mine ran into this last year with, I believe, a HRSA grant. So if you don't know what HRSA is, it's a very challenging grant. But she mentioned that they noticed how a certain conversion from like a Word document to a PDF messed up character limits and messed up the graphics for certain things, and that really just affected the entire application altogether. So those really small details are very important. So just always double check, review, and build in review processes with your team of folks. That way you're, again, just putting in the most competitive narrative as possible. So we're going to move on to who is your team, and knowing what roles will people play and why. Being able to set reasonable expectations and what will be accomplished by human. About that. Well, we haven't got like all the way through, but it's okay. So one of the things that people need to also think about too, when you're thinking about managing folks herding cats, is what kind of project management software you're using as well. So here at Pivotal, we use Basecamp. We are big fans of Basecamp. If you've never used it or never used like a project management software, I encourage you to look at some of them. There's Monday, there's Asana, there's a whole bevy of them out there in terms of project management stuff. And so when we think about that, oftentimes it allows for folks to create like a workflow that helps people communicate more effectively between each other. So in real time as well. So with Basecamp, this is not a plug for Basecamp. They don't sponsor us or anything like that, but they do allow for us to create task lists and also timelines, and also be able to tag and ping people in real time, helping people communicate on the fly or in real time, or even just be able to give people a notification on their email if they have like large email inboxes, which I know a lot of folks on our team have just bevies, just a whole thing, piles of emails. So we want to make sure like when we're communicating with folks, we're understanding like what's the best way to communicate to each other. And we use Basecamp, prioritize stuff from Basecamp as best as we can. It's the same goes for who's on your team and how you're managing your team as much as possible. When we're talking about like managing folks and herding cats specifically. Why won't this go? Okay. Tips for herding cats. How many people actually have cats? Raise your hands in the, like, using the button. Like, you can, I have a cat. She, herding her is not really possible. So, but I do know that she does respond to treats every so often, depending on the treat. So she doesn't like catnip, but for me to get her inside is like a whole different other story. It's a little crazy. So, so like herding cats, like managing folks, what works best is to get to know them. Get to know the folks that you're working with, your team, ask whether it's asking them like what's going on with their day, getting to know what's going on in their life and their work, because this helps you ascertain like what is their capacity to do a lot of that work and to help them support you, and also for you to support them through this process of the project itself. And so, how do you communicate? And so this is huge for a lot of folks. And I always tell people, like, I communicate through email. That's the best way to get me whatever. Basecamp, thankfully and mercifully, does email notifications, so I can just respond in my email client, and it goes to Basecamp and posts there, and it's like everything's done, and I can just not think about it or having to go to a text or whatever. But a lot of people have different forms of communication. So some people like the phone, some people like texting, some people like Slack, and oh my God, Slack. I don't know about Slack some days, but oh my God. Some people, and I've seen this before, some people use their Facebook Messenger, which I think is just unbelievably crazy, but they do. So, but if it's one of those things where that's the place where they respond, that's the place where they respond. Be able to utilize and recognize that and identify that within your teams and within your folks, within your committees, and you will succeed like crazy. It's a lot of things to manage, but oh my gosh, you will find it. You will find it very, very useful. The one thing I will warn you about in terms of communication modes: do not become the Department of Agriculture. So if you like Bob's Burgers, never become the Department of Agriculture. Nagging is, it happens. I do it. I will text people if they don't come to me, but if somebody misses a deadline or something like that, or some, or there's like a misstep or anything like that, or miscommunication, always good to just really directly communicate that and be as respectful as possible. And also just offer support, like I mentioned earlier. If somebody's like stressed out or they're just too anxious about it, make sure that you offer support to your team members, because you're the one that's probably going to be doing a lot and shouldering a lot of the work. And so being supportive and offering a supportive environment helps people succeed more than just like, and I can, more than like Cat Stevens and like whatever the cat's cradle thing with his father, just tears everywhere, father issues. Oh my God, terrible stuff. I see some smiling faces out there. Like, that's right. Yeah. Patriarchy, it can be so toxic and terrible. Oh my God. So yes, offer support. What can you do? This could, and prepare yourself to understand, like, this could fall to you. Like, you might have to take on maybe the brunt of that if somebody misses a step or something like that. And that's okay. Make your peace with it and move on. And that person can't, if your teammate can't make it, it's okay. It's okay. You'll make it together somehow. Yes, Department of Agriculture. Yeah. I know. Bob's Burgers. It's on Fox on Sundays. It's a great show. It's so funny. Let me see. Where are we at in terms of time? Ooh. All right. In terms of putting it all together. So this is probably like where I have like a lot of like less detail in terms of this. So like, but however, it is important that you review. So when it comes to, especially when it comes to Google Docs, like what I often will tell people is, if you're downloading a Google Doc to a PDF, make sure that your formats on your PDF are correct. Like, nothing's like splitting up. There's no extra character limits or messing up your character limits, especially if you're, heading to an online application or anything like that. Make sure that still translates. Very, very important. You also want to review your checklist that you made earlier when you were doing your setup, so that you have all your attachments, you have all of your documents, whether that's your budget, whether that's a PDF of your budget. Some people, like, I know whenever you're creating a budget and it's like an Excel, it can be a little daunting. So just make sure that whenever you're printing and putting it into a PDF, that it's actually fit and it's not too small and like a reviewer can read it. Because honestly, what you're trying to do is make sure that you're putting together a document that a reviewer can actually see. And read cogently and cohesively, and not say like at 10 o'clock at night when they're reviewing all these applications. There's 50 of them. And believe me, I'm a grant reviewer on a foundation board. It's a lot. So you want to make sure it's as easy as possible. The one thing that I often say too, whenever you're putting together all of your grant applications, make sure you have a table of contents. Seriously, they might not ask for a table of contents, but believe me, whenever I see a table of contents, whether it's a federal grant, whether it's a foundation grant or anything like that, oh my God, it's helpful. So to be able to like demarcate what pages, what sections are in, super, super helpful. I promise. So yes, table of contents. And as you're starting to wrap up your project specifically, like understand like what are the number of days you're going to give yourself before submission. Now, I know a lot of folks in the call have probably done last minute submissions. Like raise your hand in the little box if you've done a very last minute submission. What's that? Any horror stories you might want to share in the chat? But I can tell you right now, yeah, Felicity, yes. It can be kind of a nightmare. So I've been on a federal grant, I think a USDA grant or something like that. No, it was a HUD grant. And somebody was like gonna submit at like 11:59, a minute before midnight. I'm like, please don't do, oh my God. And it was a nightmare because guess what happened? Grants.gov froze at 11:59. That was a very, it got in, it did, but it was very tense for about 30 seconds. I've also been with groups that didn't submit on time, like, oh my God, like a HRSA grant. If you've ever had a HRSA grant, those are a nightmare. But yeah, like grants.gov froze, you could like, we called support, it wasn't even up, it like messed up some formatting and like pushed a lot of our verbiage out of context, and it just messed up our whole application completely. It was just like, oh my God. So that was a wash. When it comes to like in-person submissions, I know like there might be some government folks on this call, but I know some municipalities like still require folks to do like binders, which is crazy, but that happens. So make sure that you give yourself a few days, at least a few days, and ideally a week. But I know that's ideal. At least 2 or 3 days to like really review and then get your submission all together so that you're not panicking at the last minute and running down to City Hall here in Albuquerque and be like, please wait, don't close, because I've done that. It's hard, and thankfully they love me, but oh my God. So yeah. Anyway, that's pretty much like all I had in terms of this, but I know folks, like, I know we have like a small crowd today. Like I just wanted to like have conversations. So what, folks are welcome to have like questions in the chat, and I'm going to stop sharing and we'll just put it in like gallery view so we can just have a look at like who's in the audience today. So anyone have any questions, comments, horror stories, anything you want to share? I know Eric has a few. You don't? No. What? Get out of here.
Just enjoying the time. Great presentation. Thank you.
That's good to know. That is good to know. I'm just going to scan the chat. I'm seeing some like familiar faces in my call today. I'm just going to lift this up from Sabrina. Volunteer for several groups, including a PTA. I'm willing to help fill in the needed steps to help any group I'm involved in start the steps to funding. Also, I'm going to be driving home from an appointment, so I won't be able to have much input during the webinar. That's okay. Sabrina, if you have any other questions about some of the steps that you need to start, feel free. I know you might be driving home or anything like that, but feel free to add anything specifically. I actually didn't have it on this slide deck, but what I can do is, we didn't actually talk a lot about some of the pieces that you need to like put together like program stuff, like program design. In fact, one of the things that we talk about a lot here at Pivotal is logic models. So I'm just we're gonna cover logic models more broadly at a later presentation, but I will just go through some of the things that we talked about at a recent kind of workshop with our talent academy. And so just kind of give a brief overview. This also, I feel like as a model helps understand project management specifically, like it gives you an understanding of like your inputs, your outputs, like who's going to be involved, and then what is your workflow like more broadly look like. And a lot of folks use this for program design. I use this for project management specifically. So let me just make sure I have the right slides. There we go. Okay. Let's see that. Okay, we'll do that. Of course, I can't see. Anyway. Folks can see that. So with logic models, oftentimes, like I mentioned before, they're used for program design, but I often use them for program output or for project management specifically. So I know you probably can't see this, but this is the typical logic model format. And so working from left to right, so you have your inputs, you have your outputs, and then you have inputs, activities, outputs, and then short-term outcomes, and then long-term outcomes. So literally what you're doing in a lot of ways is working. I always tell people to work backwards. Like what are the things you're trying to accomplish in the world? And then for grant applications, like, okay, we're just trying to get this grant out. But oftentimes you can write in like your long-term outcomes into a grant application just by going through this process. It's really great visual summary. In fact, a lot of federal grants ask for a logic model. So you want to make sure that you're, if you have questions about this in some ways, but it also helps to really kind of outline like who's going to be involved in your project, especially who's going to take up a lot of the slack, whether it's you, whether it's your team, and also just thinking through like what are your like big activities that you're going to do, especially for program planning. And this is kind of like a preparatory thing before you go into like the project management piece of it, like the project management of a grant application specifically, but always very helpful in terms of its formatting. So I'm just going to go through a couple of these slides so you don't have to see all of them, but in essence, this is what a logic model does. Get you from strategy to results. And so understanding what your strategies and tactics are, whether it's inputs, activities, and outputs versus results, which is your near and long-term. Oftentimes I see like near, middle, and long-term, and then understanding like, okay, these are things that are going to be brought out in the future. So anyway, some recommendations creating for solid logic models itself. Keep it a page, keep it at a page. Most people don't want like 5-page logic models. Those are just ridiculous. I've seen some very complicated logic models before. It's like, can you follow this? It's not cohesive anyway. You're not actually following it. So it's supposed to be logical. It's supposed to be logical. If you have somebody that is good with like visual communication, visual design, it's always very helpful to get them into the process here, especially for logic models. Make sure that your numbers match from your logic model to your program narrative and for your evaluation narrative as well. A lot of folks sometimes like they'll create outputs and say like, we're going to serve X amount of people, and that doesn't translate to the grant narrative. So make sure you're checking that upon review, because it will change like the dynamic of your evaluation. So just make sure, and make sure that it can stand alone and explain your program. And what I mean by that is, you want to be able, people want, it's kind of like an elevator pitch. You want to be able to make sure like all these details that you're putting into a program, into a project, you can see them all on a one-pager. Like what are 3 to 5 bullets that says this is what we're doing and how, and as simply as possible, because there's a lot of applications out there, and you're competing with a lot of folks. So you want to make sure that one, yours sticks out, like it grabs people's attention, and 2, it makes sense. It makes sense, from program outreach to program service to evaluate. All those pieces kind of fit together seamlessly. So I can't say that enough. And I mentioned before that I'm on a grant review committee for a foundation, and we just reviewed in the fall like 48 applications. Yeah, and I was a little bit behind because I know like I was doing this as a volunteer, and at 10 o'clock at night, 11 o'clock at night, I'm looking at applications thinking to myself, okay, which one is the most simplest one I can actually understand? And if I can't understand it, then I'm not gonna rate it very well. So think about your reviewers, because they will make the case for you, or they will literally just throw it in a pile and say like, I didn't understand. So clear as possible. These are other like little tips. Don't get too fancy. People get really fancy too far out. So it's be as simple. Simple is better. Less is more. Keep thinking that as much as possible in terms of logic models, especially. I'm gonna lift up a question I got in the chat, if that's okay. I write our grants, so I'm not gonna name it. I write our grants, so and sometimes often get discouraged, feeling like I'm in a vacuum. When grant applications I've written are rejected, do you know what the average success rate is for grant writing? Yeah, it's about anywhere between 25 and 30%. That's the national average. And so I think that's the national average. If you check out Grant Professionals Association, you'll find a lot of that information there. So I hope that helps. Getting rejected sucks. It does. It sucks really bad. But you know, what I often tell people, with rejection comes an opportunity to learn. So, and I imagine you probably already do. So if I'm making a presumption here, I apologize. But you know, make sure that you're reaching back to your funders or wherever you're applying to, and just make sure and ask, is there any feedback on a particular application or anything like that? You'll be surprised. A lot of funders actually give feedback. A lot of federals don't, depending on your relationship with whatever department you're applying to. But even small foundations will give feedback. They might just feel the need in some ways. So I hope that helps in some way. I'm also going to lift this question up. Would appreciate your perspective on evaluations, which is how to stand among applicants. At what point in the project management process should the eval plan be defined? Who should have input? So the evaluation plan should be defined in the beginning. Like what are some measurements you're trying to accomplish, and also make sure that the people on your team, and especially in your nonprofit organization, agree on what those outputs are. Because I've sat on boards and worked at organizations where that's not been the case, and your program managers are just like, where did this number come from? I can't serve this many people in this amount of time. So make sure that your evaluation is at the front end, because that helps to identify like your expectations after you get the award. And you asked about who should have input. Specifically, program managers and program directors should have input in evaluation plans, mostly because they're the ones that are on the front line doing the work and the service. But if there are any other frontline service people in an organization, I always tell people make sure that they have some sort of input on that, because they're the ones making the turning the wheel in the organization in a lot of ways. And if you can, if there are people that are directly impacted by the issue going on in the community, I suggest doing input from them as much as possible, because they can help improve the effectiveness of your service. So for instance, I used to work in homeless services for a long time, and it was so difficult to get input from unhoused folks. But however, if you're getting their input, you can start to understand the housing process a lot differently in the system at which they have to deal with housing. So for instance, whenever you're going for an inspection for fair housing and through HUD, there is a laundry list of things that people have to check a box off in terms of, whether or not an apartment's ready for a person. So the more and more that what it is that needs to pass for inspection, so that somebody can get into a house more quickly, and also guiding people through that process and holding their hand rather than stressing them out, especially if they have a substance use issue or a mental health issue, then they're going to succeed much better. So it's a matter of it was a matter of us saying as an organization, we can handhold. That's not a big deal. So and found more success in housing retention that way. So yeah. I hope that answers your question, Claire. This one is Sophia. How often would you say local grantors want to see the organization's logic model versus federal? That's a good question. I'd say federal grantors more. Federal funders want to see logic models more so. I can't give you an exact percentage, but I can tell you most of the federal funders we see like applications we see, whether it's like USDA or like economic development. They want to see those kind of things versus like McCune or anything like that. Although I haven't seen McCune's application in a year, so I might be around. But I don't necessarily see those from like local funders, like smaller funders specifically. Maybe Kellogg. Kellogg's a bigger funder though. Scanning for questions. Anyone else have any questions? Those are great questions, by the way. And feel free to unmute too. You are welcome to unmute yourselves.
I have another question.
Sure.
Don't quite know the perfect way to word it, but we are, I presume all of us are writing grants because there is a problem to solve and we would like help solving that problem. How much should you write in the grant, like the pain of the situation, to sort of spell out the problem that you hope to solve, versus just saying how much capacity and, you know, good-heartedness your organization has? Like, what's the balance there?
Well, I would say that it depends on your word limit and your character limit, logistically. But I definitely think like you want to make sure that like the problem that you're trying to solve is clear, you know, and demonstrating whatever the need is. So like, you know, if there are 100 people that are unhoused in a community and you can only serve 50 or the community can only serve 50 because of, you know, the system, that's the way the system is built, and you as an organization will cover the next 25, like that's clear. Like, and that's an oversimplification, but I think in any way that you can make it as simple for a grant writer to see like what the need is and how that you're addressing that need is.
Do you have any tips for finding out who the grant reviewers would be for an organization? Because I know some organizations have a very broad review board, and some might be in the field that you're writing for, and some might not be working in that field and know nothing about those issues. So, you know, you want to be able to spell it out so anybody understands the problem. But do you have any tips for navigating that?
I'm really sorry, Sophia. Your audio like cut out on my end, and I didn't hear like any question.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
Okay, great. Well, your audio just changed on my end as well for some reason. So my question was about grant review boards, because I know they're different for each organization. Some of them are smaller, some of them are larger, some of them have more sort of broad community members, and they might not work in the field of that you're writing for. So do you have any tips on finding out who the grant review boards are, or if that's possible for organizations?
No.
Ooh, that's a hard question. So depending on the foundation or the funder, it can be very difficult. So like, for instance, like AmeriCorps does like a very public process for like asking who's on the review committee. And so you can typically find out if you're a volunteer on it. United Way like has their grant review process, which is mostly committee. And I think they're actually like moving away from it, but I could be wrong. But they have like panels which they choose community members. I am on the Con Alma Health Foundation Community Advisory Committee, so I'm on their grant committee. You can actually see my name on their website as part of it, but you don't know that I'm a grant reviewer. And so the best way to find out is the best way to find out oftentimes is to go volunteer for them. So to find out like how are they taking volunteers for a grant reviewer. Be very clear, like I feel like that you sit on a nonprofit organization, you just want to see what the process is like and understand it more. Most people are willing to take volunteers for grant reviews. Grant reviews is a lot of work. It is a lot of work to review like 50 applications in a month or a week, which is what I AmeriCorps is very intense. I did that like once, and the applications are long, and it is actually a lot more work and added to my work week than I really wanted. But I made it through it. But my gosh, it was hard. So yeah, that's my recommendation: finding out like how you get on a grant review committee and just understanding the process a little bit more. Because I think the other part of your question was how to demonstrate more of your critical need of your organization. Is that what you're going for, or could you clarify more of that?
I just got feedback on one of our applications that, not from the funder, but from a, what's the word I'm looking for? Consultant, thank you. Wow. That we should write in more of the pain of the problem and not just focus on how we're going to provide a solution.
Okay. I understand that a little bit more. There are a lot of folks, depending on your grant reviewers, like, and who you're engaging with at the foundation. Like if it's a foundation, you're engaging with a program, like either a program officer or a program specialist of some sort, versus like someone like United Way, who may have maybe a community member. So like understanding who that audience is very helpful. So it's always helpful to ask like whoever your contact is at a funder, at a funding office, whether it's government, like who's going to be on your review committee. So for government, oftentimes it's like either a set of let me use the city for example. So like the city will use the city of Albuquerque specifically will use like staffers from like Department of Family and Community Services. They'll review the grant, the application. So and they may even do it with a subcommittee of a city commission. And so those are people that might not be in the know. They might give like an objective kind of standpoint perspective. So it's good to ask like who your point person is, like what does the review process look like specifically. And for a lot of federals, like you're thinking they give you point systems for like which part of your narrative they're going to grade specifically, and like how is that going to be evaluated like in the review process. So it's good to ask your point of contact and just understand like who are you writing to. Like you might be writing to somebody who wants the pain points, like they want to understand how are you helping people and understand how other people. Like if you're writing to a bank like Wells Fargo or Senda, you're writing to bankers. So like think about like what are the things that appeals to that specific set of reviewers. So I hope that helps. Cool. It is 2:53. I'm just scanning the chat again. Thanks everyone for their chat questions and for their comments. Also, thanks for laughing at my jokes. Oh my God. Anyone else have any questions? You're welcome to and have the floor. I am also going to just leave my email. I'm going to put the slide again with my contact information, but for folks, this is my email address. And we'll just go ahead and share this. We'll go ahead and wrap up. But again, our next New Mexico Recovers workshop is next Wednesday on the 15th at 2 p.m. We'll be covering should you apply for the grant, which is a really great way to just kind of understand like, okay, is this mission aligned, what are choices you need to make, all that good stuff. So stay tuned for that for next Wednesday. And our good friend Tanya Brown from the Grant Plan will be doing that presentation. My email is listed on this slide. I know I dropped it in the chat as well, but I can also reach by the phone. So if you dial extension 1, you'll get my voicemail. Feel free to leave me a voicemail. It goes straight to my email so I can actually see it. As I mentioned before, email is my best mode of communication. I do the phone. I will call people. And I will call people back, but I'm not as good at that as I am with email. So with that, if you have any other questions, feel free to email me or anything like that. We'll make sure that this recording and these slides are available to folks so they can have it. We'll probably make those issued to folks within probably like a day or two But either way, I really appreciate everyone joining us for this very brief hour. I can't believe this went so quickly, but I really appreciate you all joining us for our series, and we'll see you next time. Take care, you all. Have a good day.